Good morning, everyone. Someone asked me if it was hard to follow breakfast, and I said it was easier to follow breakfast than it is to be the last speaker of the day, so it's okay. Good morning. Today we're going to talk about difficult decisions. And sometimes when we're talking about policies and we're talking about practices, they are not necessarily one and the same thing. And I think you'll find that as we talk about some of the things, the issues that we're going to discuss, and you think about what happens at your agency, and you know that you have a policy, and that policy is in place. But how that policy is applied might be a little different. And it might be different between Joe, your bus driver, and Bob, your bus driver. Or it might be different between Jane, the dispatcher, and it might be different between John, the dispatcher. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how to get some consistency going within your agency, and even how to know if there are inconsistencies happening. So we'll talk about policies versus procedures. We're also going to talk about how we communicate those policies. How do we communicate policies with our riders? How do we communicate policies with our staff? How do we communicate policies with our governing bodies? You know, just the general public, so that they know what it is we do. There's lots of people who need to know what it is we do and how it is we do it. Then we'll talk about why consistency matters. Because, you know, you think, well, what's the difference if we do it just a little bit different? Well, then we start talking about equal treatment. And that becomes a problem for an agency if one person gets treated one way and another person gets treated another. All that ties into your rider policies, which turns into your customer service that you give to other people. We'll talk about when people need to make decisions when they're on the road. So lots of times the bus drivers are out there and something comes up while they're driving, and they actually have to make the decision on the fly. While they're out there, they have to decide, now what is it I'm going to do about this situation? And we want to give them all the tools that we can possibly give them so that they can make the best decisions possible. We're going to talk about reasonable modification. That's a part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it actually has rules that go along with it. There's whole classes that we teach on ADA, reasonable modification, but just some of the techniques and tools that you might want to have at your disposal at your agency, so that you know that when those drivers are out there and they're making those reasonable modification decisions, that there's some consistency driver to driver or dispatcher to dispatcher. And then I've got a few resources for you, so places that you can go to get more information. When we talk about policies, policies are sort of your rules. Policies are the things that govern your agency, and they are the things that dictate how you're going to go about doing things. And while lots of times the director of the agency helps determine what those policies are actually passed by your governing body. And whether that's a board of directors or a council on governments or whoever you are governed by, those are actual rules that get put into place. When we talk about procedures, it's really how we go about implementing those policies and what are those day-to-day instructions of how we're going to make those policies work. Whether we're talking about policies or we're talking about procedures, they're really the backbone of your agency, because everything you do every day is based on this is how we do it. And when you're trying to give an onboarding or orientation to a new employee, you tell them this is our agency, this is what we do, and then you tell them this is how we do it. Then you put them on a bus if they're a new driver, and you say, ride along with this person, and they'll tell you how you go about doing it for this particular route. And you might say, I'm also going to have you ride along with this person. And when they get in with that person, the person gives them a whole different set of instructions about how we go about doing a particular thing. And now this new driver has to figure out, is it this way or that way? And maybe lots of times it's a combination of both. But many times they're using their discretion to figure out what it is they're going to do. Policies and procedures help us determine an appropriate set of actions. They also help get us to be as consistent as possible. We're never going to do everything absolutely consistently, But the goal is that we do as much consistently as we possibly can so that our passengers know what to expect, so that our drivers know what to expect, so that our dispatchers know what to tell people we're going to do, and so that you can count on the fact that this is how your agency is operating on a day-to-day basis. It supports your agency's vision and its mission. It's a reference for decision making, hopefully for your drivers as well as for your agency. And most importantly, your policies and procedures are going to protect you. That's where lawsuits come from, is when we start having some of those inconsistencies. Policies are important because they need to be formal. They will be seen by others both internally within your agency and externally. They may need to support you in those legal actions that I was talking about. And it depends on an understanding and interpretation of what those policies are. And it's when we get to the interpretation that there gets to be some issues. The issue here is that mistakes can be costly. Because once you get into inconsistencies, then that's what a lawyer can leap onto, right? And say, okay, this isn't done the same as this. How do we communicate our policies? Well, we do it in a number of ways. You all have an employee handbook, and that is not only what your responsibilities as a company are to the employee, but what the employee is expected to do in return. You have hopefully a bus driver manual or handbook that talks about things on the road and policies and procedures that the bus drivers follow. I hope you all have rider's guides. If not, this is a good checklist of things that you might want to make sure you have. I hope you are having all staff meetings where everyone gets together in the same room, but maybe you're having bus driver meetings separate from that and dispatcher meetings. And I hope periodically you're having combined bus driver and dispatcher meetings, because lots of times some of the problems that occur are because dispatchers are interpreting things one way and drivers are anticipating that things are going to go another way, and you get a lot of finger pointing. Why does consistency matter? Well, mostly it is for equal treatment, so that we treat our staff members the same and our customers get treated the same. But again, it's your defense in case of lawsuits. And sometimes we do a whole class on, did you know this happened to someone out there? And then you can hear all the horror stories of recent lawsuits that have taken place and learn how to avoid some of those same mistakes. So how do we communicate our policies with our riders? Well, we do it through a rider's guide. We do it through dispatch instructions. We do it through our website and our social media. We do it through the way our drivers treat the passengers and what instructions they give them. So when we do that, all of those are ways that we're communicating. So how can those communications be improved? Well, one of the best ways they can be improved is the fact that they can be more consistent. Because anytime you have more than one dispatcher or more than one driver, you can get mixed messages. The dispatcher might say something different than what the driver tells them. And so passengers say, well, this is the way I understood this was going to work. Okay. Or one dispatcher tells them one thing, and another day when another dispatcher's on, they get a different message of how this is going to work. Or one driver takes and drops them off somewhere, and another driver picks them up, and they get two different messages. Or on Tuesday it's one driver, but next week Thursday it's a different driver, and the procedures aren't quite the same. And that's why it matters. And that's why we need things like Rider's Guide, and that's why we need bus driver meetings, so that everyone has a chance to talk about these things and decide how it is as an agency we're going to approach it. What are some of the biggest policies that cause the most conflict for agencies? Well, it's things like refusal of service. When do we tell someone that they can no longer ride with us or they can't get on the bus? How about door-to-door versus curb-to-curb service? How many of you are curb-to-curb service right now? Okay, how many of you are door-to-door? Okay, do you have to provide door-to-door service if someone asks for it? Oh, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Number of packages. I did a dispatch customer service training here in Alabama, and we had 2 dispatchers from the same agency. And what I asked everyone to do is to first write down what your policy is on packages. And they both had the exact same policy written down for packages. But when we went around and had our discussion, they said, but a few more is okay. One of them did. And so I said, okay, a few more is okay. How many is a few more? And they were on completely different thought processes about what a few more was. Well, depends on if the driver's willing to carry more, if the driver's able to carry more. And I said, well, how many is more? And one said, oh, I think they could take 5 or 6. And another one said, 5 or 6? They aren't going to carry 5 or 6 packages. I said, well, how about kind of an oversized package? If someone comes out of a Walmart and they have, a great big box of something, is the driver going to carry that? And one said, yeah. If the driver can lift it, they'll carry it, and we'll take it. And the other one says, no, we won't. Same agency. Then I was in South Dakota, and I was teaching a class where it was at a conference like this where they had the rodeo along with the conference. And we always have a session there. Some of you know that I'm originally from North Dakota. North Dakota and South Dakota have a joint transit conference. And when we have the rodeo, then we have one day with one meeting where the bus drivers and the transit directors are in the same room. And I was doing a training similar to this for them and asking about different policies and procedures, and it was very eye-opening for a lot of directors. But 2 bus drivers were sitting right next to each other, and I asked about packages, and they said, I said, tell me your policy about packages, and 2 drivers sitting next to each other both raised their hands, and they said, okay, I'm going to call on both of you, and you can't change your answer. Tell me what your policy is on packages. And one said, unless people arrange for their packages to be assisted with in the, when they call into dispatch, we don't help with any packages. And the other guy looked at him and said, sure we do. We help with packages every day. And the guy said, I don't. The guy said, I do. And the director was sitting in the next chair. I'm not saying which one's right or wrong, but what's the agency policy so that people get consistent service? What happens to the lady who goes to the grocery store and she counts on the driver being able to help with packages because this guy always does it? And she gets on with the other bus driver and he doesn't. And it happens every day, not only in South Dakota, but at your agencies as well. Fare payment. How do we do fares? What do we do if someone doesn't have the fare? What's the policy? Strollers. Do they have to remain open? Do they have to remain closed? Can the child remain in a stroller? Does the child have to come out of the stroller? Do you have to have a car seat? Who provides a car seat? There's all kinds of policies. And you'll find that that isn't always consistently applied. Food or beverages consumed on board. Poor hygiene. We're going to use one of those as an example coming up. None of you have people who have bad odors, right? That's always one of the typical issues that comes up at any of these kinds of policy discussions. What do you do about intoxicated passengers? Do you let them ride? Okay, I have people who say, absolutely not. And other people who say, well, we don't want them driving. If they're behaving, is it a behavior issue or is it an intoxication issue? Foul language, oversized items. You get to Walmart and this time it's not just a big box, it's an oversized TV. Wait time for a passenger, and what I mean by that, are you going to wait for a passenger while they run in to pick up their prescriptions? When they decide they want to run into the bank and just get some money, they want to just stop at the ATM, they have to go to the post office, and it's a side stop. What are your policies? So let's look at a couple of scenarios, and I'm just going to give you an opportunity to think about some of these things and see if any of them ever happen at any of your agencies. Sarah's an 85-year-old passenger with poor hygiene. She rides your bus to go to her doctor's appointments and go grocery shopping. You've received a number of complaints from other passengers. Some drivers want her suspended from riding. What's your policy? Our agency's policy and practice is we would put up with the situation and do nothing about it. Someone from the agency would talk to Sarah about her hygiene. If it did not improve, she would be suspended from riding for a short period of time. C, someone from the agency would talk to Sarah about her hygiene. She would not be suspended. D, we would make a referral to social services about Sarah. Or E, something other than that. And you might do more than one of these things. You might say, someone's going to talk to her. She might be suspended for a short period of time. Oh, someone's going to talk to her. She would not be suspended. And we're going to make a referral to social services. Or we're going to talk to a family member about her, or whatever it happens to be. Some of you would have different policies. Problem is, your drivers need to know what those policies are. You also need to know what ADA says. If Sarah is a person with a disability, you cannot suspend her from riding. So even if she has the worst foul odor, you cannot suspend her because it's protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act if she is a person with a disability. Okay? Do your drivers know that? Do you know that? Okay, so what are our options and what are we going to do? Some of this might be on a case-by-case basis, but we want to also treat people fairly. If, because Sarah has a disability, we're not going to suspend her from driving, what are we going to do for Bill, who doesn't have a disability, but he smells bad too? Now, what you can do is if the person has leaking body fluids, so now it's a biohazard on your bus, that's different than foul body odor, right? So now Sarah can be suspended from riding because now that bus has to be taken out of service and sanitized before it can be used. So that's a whole different issue. What's causing those body fluid odors? But you need to have a policy and a procedure and know what you're going to do and then consistently apply it. Let's look at scenario number 2. Mary boards the bus. There are a number of passengers on the bus. She does not have a bus ticket or the fare to pay for her ride. She's a regular passenger and she has mild dementia. This has happened before. How should the driver handle the situation and what's your agency's policy? Excuse me. The driver would note it in his log and let Mary ride. Mary would be charged for the ride. The driver would let Mary ride. Mary would not be charged for the ride. The driver would not let Mary ride. Mary would be allowed to ride, and someone from the agency would contact Mary's family or guardian. Mary may not have a family member or guardian, okay, or something else. What's the driver supposed to do? It's the driver who's in that position, right? Because it's the driver who's sitting behind the wheel when Mary gets on the bus. What's your agency going to do? The reason we want to have policies and procedures is so that your driver does not get put in an uncomfortable position. That these kinds of scenarios have been discussed at bus driver meetings, they've been discussed at other things, so that the driver knows exactly how he should handle that situation. And so that if it's Bob, he's going to handle the situation the same way that Tom's going to handle it. So that you have consistency within your agency. And then that the drivers come back and report to you so that you know that this is happening on your bus. We used to have drivers who would say, oh, you know what, I just put the money in for Mary. I know what the situation is. Well, that's not what we expect our drivers to do either. Okay? But you need to be aware of the situation, and then this has to be a discussion within your agency. Scenario number 3. A passenger, John, gets on the bus and is very agitated. The passenger does not have money to pay the fare. The driver is not aware of the cause of the situation, but she's reasonably sure that pressing John for the fare or trying to force the customer off the bus will only cause further disruption or escalate the situation. How should the driver handle the situation, and what options does the driver have? What's your agency policy and practice on this? What do you suggest? What do you tell your driver they should do?
First, I'd let them ride.
Okay, absolutely, right? You'd want to let them ride. Okay? You'd want an incident report. Okay, yes.
Yeah, we had
John?
this come up a lot. I'm sure everyone does.
Absolutely.
And we just tell them to have a seat and pay us tomorrow.
Okay?
Now, if it's third or fourth time and he or she still hasn't paid up, then we tell them they can't ride until they pay the fare.
Right. But it's your driver that's in that position, right? This is the person who's acting hostile. Okay? It's your driver who feels threatened and isn't sure what to do. So one of the things we can do is, does your agency provide de-escalation training for your drivers? Yes, we do. No, we don't, or perhaps we should. One of the things you can do is give your drivers the skills of how to handle that, and then back it up with a policy or practice that makes them feel comfortable of what they're going to do in that situation. Don't make them decide at that moment. If that driver's a big burly guy, he might decide to keep that passenger off. If it's a small petite woman, she might say, I was scared to death, I didn't know what to do. It might depend on if it's a nighttime or if it's the middle of the day and where that bus is located. But give them the tools they need so they know how to do it, and that they have some idea of what the agency wants to back when that situation happens for each one of them. Scenario 4. You have a passenger with a disability who frequently rides your bus. Sometimes she has her husband along as her personal care attendant, who then rides free. Sometimes she rides alone. Your drivers are frustrated because they feel like she's gaming the system. What do you need to do to resolve the situation? What's your agency's policy? How does the ADA view personal care attendants? The person with a disability decides if the person's a care attendant. Sometimes a person with a disability may need a PCA and sometimes the person may not. The agency does not get to decide if a person with a disability has a PCA or not. Or all of the above are covered by the ADA. The answer, of course, is D. All of the above are considered rules under the ADA. So the answer is, if she says it's a personal care attendant, he's a personal care attendant. So your policy is very clear here. He rides free. This happened at my agency. Were they gaming the system? Probably. Okay. Is it worth a lawsuit? No. Okay. And also, sometimes people with disabilities have hidden disabilities. Okay, it could be, yes, she has a physical disability that all of you can see and you know she has that disability, but maybe she also has fibromyalgia. Maybe she has arthritis, and one day it's much worse than it is another day. Maybe she's going to the hairdresser one day and she doesn't need him along for that, but she's going to the doctor another day and she needs him for it to be another set of ears. We don't make those choices for people. And you need to have these discussions with your drivers because, at least in my situation, it was pretty cut and dried for them. They're gaming the system, we shouldn't have to do this. But when they started to hear about what some of the other alternatives were and why she might need them sometimes and why not others, or the fact that even if they were gaming the system, it didn't make any difference because the ADA is pretty clear, it has rules about this, and it's not worth a lawsuit to our agency to deny her PCA, then they at least understood why the decision was made the way it was. And that's why you not only have to have a policy, but you have to be able to explain the policies. We also need to review and revise our policies. Some of you have policies that you have had in policy and procedure books forever and ever. Okay. During COVID, a whole lot of policies had to change, right? Some of you went to charging no fares. Some of you went to having people not be able to sit next to each other on the bus. We know that everyone had to wear a mask. There were all kinds of things that had to change. Your policies need to be looked at every single year. And then on the bottom of that policy, it should be dated so that you know when you reviewed it last. You have some policies that have stood the test of time and are going to be your policies ongoing. But you have other policies that maybe could go by the wayside because things change. So you need to be reviewing them, but you need to know when you last reviewed them. And you have to be flexible so that you have a way of getting rid of old policies and putting in new ones. But remember, policies are passed by your governing body, whether it's a board of directors or your council of governments or your county commission, whoever it happens to be. And remember, they're the ones who have to change the policy. You can't just pull a policy out. It has to be approved by your governing body. Recognize indications that it's time for a policy change. More instances of policy violations are taking place. The service has changed, so now that policy is irrelevant. Or you have had an increase in complaint from staff or passengers. But make sure that you're reviewing them and knowing what those policies are. And then if you make a change, making sure that you communicate it to your dispatchers, to your receptionist, okay, to all of your staff, and especially to your drivers. Make sure you're looking for external feedback on your policies as well. Sometimes we just look internally and say, well, this is what works best for us, but we need to figure out what works best for other people who are riding our buses too. It's not only how you see your policies, but how do your customers react to them? We ask them a lot of things when we do surveys, but do we ever ask them about some of our policies? How do you feel about our package policy? How do you feel about this policy or that policy? Okay. How about your reservation policy, your advanced reservation policy for those of you who have them? Okay. Do you ask your passengers, or are you afraid that if you ask them and you're not planning to change it, that's a problem, right? So make sure that you get the feedback and then monitor what that feedback is. And sometimes it might be just telling your dispatchers that when people ask for something, when they call in and they say, do you do this? That a dispatcher knows to write it down, because that's feedback for you. Lots of times what the dispatchers do is they just say, no, we don't do that. And you never know that anyone even asked. Because if you get asked for the same things over and over again, maybe you'd like to change what you do. But unless someone's tracking it, you'll never know. The bottom line is your policy work is never done. You're going to be working on policies today, tomorrow, and 10 years from now. So what does that have to do with customer service? The cartoon says, we got rid of our customer service department. We got tired of people calling it all the time. Okay? Sometimes that's the attitude we sort of bring to customer service. Not officially, of course. But, oh, they keep asking for things. They keep wanting more. Okay? But that's what we're supposed to be in, is the business of customer service. So let's talk about what are some of the customer service rules. Okay? We say policies are sort of rules. So what are some of our customer service rules that we should be thinking about? Rule number 1, you can't teach a service culture. Some of you might disagree with that. You say, well, yes, I can. I can tell them what I expect. Yeah, but you have to live it. People have to see it in place. They have to experience it, and then people have to share it, and they have to show it. That is what service culture is about. I can't remember it. Do you have Nordstrom's in Alabama? It's kind of a Macy's, or do you have Macy's in Alabama? Okay, it's kind of a Macy's department store. Nordstrom's department store employee handbook reflects their emphasis of exceptional customer service in just 75 words. Welcome to Nordstrom. We're glad you're with our company. Our number one goal is to provide outstanding customer service. Set both your personal and professional goals high. We have great confidence in your ability to achieve them. Use good judgment in all situations. Please feel free to ask your department manager, store manager, or human resource officer any questions at any time. Great policy. Use good judgment in all situations. That's what we want our staff to do all the time. The problem is, it allows for a lot of discretion. Would you feel comfortable saying to every one of your bus drivers, use good judgment in all situations and we'll just back you? That's why we need policies, because what one person considers good judgment is not exactly the same as everyone else. And while this looks really, really good on paper, and I love the idea of telling people to use good judgment because that's what we want them to do, we still need some policies to back them up, because one person's good judgment does not necessarily mirror that of another person's good judgment. And you see that all the time. Yeah.
You know, I can talk loud enough, but every person is different and every driver is different.
Absolutely.
And what we've came to realize is, even though you have some of those policies in place, some of those drivers, the compassion that they have for people, they're going to do more.
Right.
I don't care what we can say what we want, but they're going to do more. I see it every day, you know, and even though the policy says, hey, you know, this is what we want you to do, they find themselves doing a little more, and that's just because they have compassion for people. And in situations like that, 9 times out of 10, we just kind of let it go. So
Yep. Well, and do we want people to do more? Do we want people to care more? Absolutely, right? So we don't want to squelch that. So what we want to do is we want to put some parameters around it, though, where it doesn't get us into trouble.
Right.
So, you know, those extra courtesies, we want our drivers to care about our passengers. So absolutely. But we have to put some parameters around it so that they know when they get us into trouble by doing that. Okay? And we want to do as close as possible to equal service. You know, it is really easy to take good care of Miss Mary because she's so sweet. And she is kind, and she really needs our help. But you know, Bill, he's really grumpy. And he's kind of a pain in the neck to have on the bus. And when he gets on, we can hardly wait for him to get off. And so we aren't always really nice to Bill. We don't give him the same courtesies that we give someone else. But people watch how we treat both of them. And so I'm not saying that we don't want them to do above and beyond. And they are going to do above and beyond. So you are absolutely right. But we do have to put a little bit of parameters around some of that, because when we start to get into unequal treatment, now we're causing problems for our agency. And that's what the drivers have to see. You know, we expect you to be kind to everyone, okay? And yes, there are people who may need some extra help, but not to the point where it causes problems for the agency. And we're going to give you some more examples. Rule number 2. Hire the right people and treat them right. Some of this comes back to us. How do we treat the people that we employ? Are we treating them equal? We have some really great employees who it's really easy to like, right? And they always do that above and beyond, and they're great people. And then we have people who just kind of phone it in. They just kind of come and do the minimum, right? So we have to be careful too, because it's on us as well to treat people right, and which means treating them equal. But when you hire someone, always start with the premise that attitude is the most important. You can't make people nice people, but you can teach them skills. So look for that positive attitude. Look for that people service attitude. Look for the reason they need that job. Southwest Airlines has a position that is actually called the Vice President of People. It's an HR position. And that person is often asked the question, how do you get your employees to be so nice? And the answer is, we hire nice people. Rule number 3, engage your employees. Make them feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves. When we talk teamwork, we should be talking team. Do your employees think of themselves as we? Do they think of them as us? Or do they find themselves just being individuals out there? That's something very important. And so it starts with a compelling vision. Most of you have mission statements. And I bet if we collected all the mission statements of people in this room, they would sound pretty much alike. Safe, reliable service, efficient, whatever, okay? All those things. But do you have a vision? Do you have something that your team can buy into and really feel like it's theirs? Every employee has to see how they fit into that big picture. Dr. Martin Luther King used to gather thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people. And he would hold these large civil rights rallies, and he would inspire people. When he inspired them, he didn't get there and say, I have a great strategic plan. What did he say? I have a dream. That was in 1963. That was before a lot of you were born. It was so powerful that today we still remember that word. I have a dream. Okay? So what is our vision that our employees can buy into that makes them feel part of something bigger than themselves? My transit agency was called James River Transit. And when I got there, we did not have a vision. We had a mission statement that was about a paragraph long, and not one of my employees could have told you exactly what it is. They could have told you pieces, that were in it. It doesn't do any good to have people memorize this paragraph, because that's a memorization. They have to know why they do what they do and why it's important. And so we came up with a vision that says, James River Transit, making a difference. Now, we were also a multi-service program. We had all the meal programs. We covered 14 senior centers. We had 3 counties. We covered 4,600 square miles with our transit program. Okay. It didn't matter if you were the janitor, the bus driver, the receptionist, a cook. It didn't matter what position you had at that agency. We make a difference. Every person could figure out how they bought into that. What difference can you make? You can make a difference for a passenger, a coworker. Everyone can figure out how they make a difference. What do you have that your team can buy into so that they feel like they are really part of what it is you do and how it is you do it? That's what being part of a team is, so that they see how they fit in. Too often we just have a mission statement, we put it up on a shelf. Okay? No one really knows exactly what it is. But if you have a catch line for your agency that everyone can figure out how they can contribute to that, they feel part of a team. That can make a difference. Everyone can figure out what they can do. Rule number 4, first impressions last. We know that, right? We meet people, and right away you know if there's somebody you're going to like. You go, I kind of like that person. Okay? And sometimes you meet someone, you go, oh, there's just something about that person. I'm not kind of crazy about that. Okay? And then there's some people that you kind of didn't like at first, but they kind of grow on you a little bit. Okay? But first impressions last, and we always have to overcome whatever that first impression was. What's the first impression of your transit system? Your agency, your employees. Teach them that even if they can't immediately help someone, they can make a good first impression. We can all make a good first impression. Greet people. Smile. Look like you're happy to see them. That's a great first start. I know that COVID changed things for a lot of us. But this is where I usually say, when was the last time you rode your own vehicle? You got on a bus and thought about it as a passenger from that perspective. We're kind of coming out of COVID a little bit. At least things are changing for the better. We don't know when the next variant will come along. We don't know what's going to happen. But we all have an opportunity. And that opportunity is a challenge that I'm going to give all of you today. And I'm not going to only give it to all of you transit directors or employees of a transit system, but I'm going to give it to all the people working for the DOT as well. When was the last time you got on a transit bus and looked at it through the eyes of being a transit rider? When you get back to work, or the first time you have the opportunity, I really would like you to go through the experience of being a passenger on a bus. Not so that you can just experience the ride, but I want you to see what it might be like to be a passenger for the first time. And so I want you to put on a different set of glasses or a different hat to think about this. Think about it from the first time you call for a ride. What was that experience like? Make a call. To the time you stand on the sidewalk as you wait to be picked up. What does that feel like? You know, for the people who have real-time technology, that's sort of like the Ubers and Lyfts of the world that tells you when that bus is coming, you know when your bus is going to arrive. For everyone else, we have that 15-minute window, okay? So you have, or 30-minute window, you have to be ready 15 minutes before, and you're still on time if it's 15 minutes after. So you're going to be picked up at 9 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock, the bus isn't there. You've had to be out there since 1:45, okay? Now it's 10 after 9 and you're still waiting. What I usually do is I set a timer and I have everyone be absolutely silent in the room for a minute. Not move. I tell you to fold your hands in the lap and just sit there. 1 minute of perfect silence is a long time. What does 30 minutes feel like when you're waiting for a bus? Much longer. That's why I really encourage all of you to investigate real-time technology. Some of you have money now. Look at that. Figure out what it's going to take so that people know when that bus is going to arrive. But now you're the passenger, and you're waiting for that bus. And it might be a few minutes early. It might be right on time. It might come within that window, but at 9:15. Pay attention. What does it feel like to step on that bus? You're the passenger. Now you're not just getting on because you're going to go for a ride, but you're actually thinking of it like, what does it feel like for a passenger doing this for the first time? So put yourself in that experience. What does it feel like to be brought up on a lift? Whether you're a standee or you choose to be in a wheelchair and see what that experience feels like. From paying your fare, finding your seat, or having your wheelchair secured. From the first drop-off to waiting for your bus to come back and pick you up. To trying to remember what you're supposed to do to get that bus to come back and get you. Then ask yourself, what were my first impressions? What did the bus look like? Was it clean? What did the outside of the bus look like? What did the driver look like? How did they greet you? Did you know where to wait for the bus? And think about things that stand out for you. You know, when you think about your mom's kitchen when you're a kid, or your grandma's kitchen, or there's fresh bread baking, or there are fresh chocolate chip cookies, you know that smell? Okay? You smell diesel, you all know what that smells like. That brings back, you know. What did that bus smell like? What did you hear? What did you feel? Is it easy to know how much to pay or what to pay? Is it easy to know where to sit? Do you need to wear a seatbelt? Does something tell you if you have to put your seatbelt on or not, or is it up to you? Do you feel comfortable asking questions? Is there adequate signage on the bus that would just answer your questions without having to ask someone? And if there are signs, what do the signs say? If you were to call, and please do, would the person who answers the phone be easy to understand? Would they be friendly? Could they speak a different language? Would you have all the information you need before you hung up the phone? And if you were a little bit confused, would the person on the other end sound, frustrated with you? Or would they be really patient? All of these things are impressions of your agency. Now, when you all go to do this, you're going to make that driver really nervous. Okay? So we're not judging how the driver reacts necessarily. What you're trying to do is get the experience of being that passenger. What did that feel like? Rule number 5. Reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. They always say you have to say something at least 3 times for it to sink in. Okay? Same with any kind of training that you're going to do or rulemaking or whatever it is. You're going to have to make sure that you have different ways of reaching people. Some people learn by listening. Some people learn by seeing it and writing. We all have different ways of getting our cues. So make sure that when you're teaching someone what your rules and policies are, that you find different ways to reach different audiences. And when you have a message you want to deliver to your customers, understand that it's not going to just happen vicariously and on its own. You're going to have a concentrated effort and a plan in place to make it happen. This may sound like something simple, and that may be common sense, but we know that things that are common sense don't always happen that way. To do it right is anything but simple. It takes everyone to be on the same page and everyone being consistent, and everyone needs to be following the same rules. The Marriott hotel chain says, "It's the little things that make the big things possible. Only close attention to the fine details of any operation make the operation first class." It's easy to pay attention to the big things. It's the little things that matter. It's telling Miss Mary when she gets on the bus that you noticed how nice her hair looked. Okay? Haven't seen you for a while. How you doing? Nice to have you back. The little things. Disney, the happiest place on earth, says do what you do so well that they want to come back again and bring their friends. That's the message we want to have for transit. Not because you have to ride, but because you know what? It's kind of fun to ride. And you were absolutely right. A lot of our drivers become really close to our passengers, especially if you're doing rural transit. A lot of them know their passengers really well. Okay? That becomes a special relationship. Here's a crash course on customer service. How about things like, "I apologize for our mistake." Sometimes all that people want to hear is, "I'm sorry." "I'm not sure, but I'll find out." "Please." "Thank you." "I appreciate you." "How is it best for me to assist you?" Don't just grab someone's arm and take them along. "How can I help you?" "Can I take care of that for you?" Or, "I can take care of that for you." Have a good rest of your day. If customer service were a competitive event, where would you be in the rankings? Why don't you ask your staff? See what they say, and see if they all would give you the same number. Hugs. Have you hugged a customer lately? Have you helped your customer beyond normal expectations, understood the nature of the customer's needs, gathered critical information by exploring the customer's situation, given the customer a chance to talk while you listen, empathized with the customer's position if there was a problem or unique circumstance, developed a trusting relationship so your customer wants to return? Have you hugged a customer lately? Free hugs. Help us give great service. What does customer service have to do with policies and procedures? That's what this whole thing was supposed to be about, right? It has everything to do with it. You're responsible for knowing the policies and procedures and then passing it on to your employees so that they know the policies and procedures. What one does for one customer, one does for all customers. Everyone follows the same procedures. That doesn't mean that we don't do above and beyond, but it means that we don't select a few. The number one area where policies and procedures tend to collide and where drivers tend to get confused and disagree on the proper way to respond is ADA reasonable modification. And I'm not going to give you an ADA reasonable modification class. That's a day-long class to do. Okay, but I am going to give you a couple of examples of what ADA reasonable modification means and why this is important for your drivers to know. Here's what ADA reasonable modification says as part of its rules. Transit systems must modify their policies to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities unless the modified policies would result in any of these three things. 1, an undue burden or fundamental alteration of your program, service, or activity. 2, a direct threat to the health or safety of others. And 3, without the requested modification, the individual with a disability could still ride your system anyway. It was just a request. It does mean, though, that you have to let people know that they can request a reasonable modification. It's like, oh no, we don't want to tell them that. Everybody will want a reasonable modification. The request process must be accessible, and the process must provide for situations in which making an advance request is not feasible. That means drivers have to be able to make the determination. Now, they can make the determination by calling into dispatch or quick trying to get a supervisor, but if they can't get a hold of someone and they need to make a decision on the spot, they have to be able to do it. And that's why you have to give them scenarios and tell them things so that they know what you would want them to decide. This leads to drivers making different decisions. But they're making them for good reasons. One driver says, I think I'm adhering directly to the agency's policies. When I say, no, we don't do that, it's because we have a policy that says we don't do it. The next driver says, I'm using my discretion to provide better customer service because ADA says I can do that. And the third one says, ADA says I must do that. So you have 3 drivers who made 3 different decisions, but all for really good reasons. That's why we have to give them examples and tell them how they make these decisions. Everyone has to be educated about reasonable modification, know what to do if they're unsure as to how to handle a situation, have them relay the same message to customers, and know that they can discuss it with management. So here's the scenario we're going to talk about. You have a curb-to-curb policy for your demand response service. You have a passenger in a wheelchair who has requested door through door, so crossing the threshold. Okay? Assistance is part of an ADA reasonable modification in order for her to use your transit system. A full-time driver, Joe, refuses to honor her request. The passenger states that Betty, another full-time driver, provides this service. How do you resolve this conflict, and what's your agency's policy? Here's the question. Are you required to provide door-through-door service as part of ADA reasonable modification? How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? The answer is no. We are never required to provide door-through-door. So, if you're a curb-to-curb service, you may be required to provide door-to-door, though. Okay? But now your drivers have to understand the distinction. Door-through-door means you're crossing a threshold. Door-to-door means taking them up to the door. However, if they're in an apartment building and it has an outside door and an inside door, you can cross the first door, just not the second door. See how complicated that can get for some drivers? Yes.
You know, I see that you use that a lot now. You see this curb to curb and door to door. But we were told that, ours like origin to
It is origin to destination.
So put that in some type of perspective there, you know, because if it's origin to destination, does it mean that it's, you know, does it start at the curb? Or does it
No,
start
if
at
you
the
are a
curb?
that's a great question. His question is, because you're an origin to destination service, what does origin to destination mean in this case? Is it curb to curb because that's the service you provide? Or is it door to door? If a person who has a disability requests door to door service and they need that door to door service in order to use your system, it doesn't matter if you're curb to curb. You have to provide door to door, which means you go to their door to get them and you bring them to the door of their destination. You never provide door through door service.
Then what's the
Okay.
purpose of having a curb-to-curb policy?
Because that curb to curb policy started before there was reasonable modification as part of the ADA. But you can have curb to curb for anyone who doesn't have a disability, but a person who has a disability has to be able to have door to door, even if you're a curb to curb system. And you can't ask if they have a disability. If they tell you they have a disability, they have a disability. Okay? And so, in other words, your curb to curb policy just became door to door if it's asked for.
Well, you might as well just
They,
take out the curb
yeah.
to curb.
Well, except it helps with the people who really don't need it
That's right.
to still have it curb to curb. You're only dealing with the people who ask for that particular service. Now, Easterseals is in the business of helping people understand the ADA, okay, and understand what it tells you and interpret what it tells you, okay? But the ADA did us a disservice in a lot of ways, in some ways of making it really difficult when you're a transit provider, because it says, okay, you only have to do this for people with disabilities, but you can't ask them if they have a disability or what their disability is or to demonstrate their disability, okay? So I'm not telling you that the ADA did everything right, but I am telling you what the ADA says and what you have to do as a result. And then let me tell you another thing. I'm going to give you some contact information coming up. One of the things that Easterseals does is if you have any questions ever about the ADA, we will get the answer for you. And first of all, Ken Thompson works for us, and I don't know anyone in the country who knows more about ADA than he does. But if he doesn't know the answer, he will look it up for you and get you the right answer. And there is never a charge, ever. So anytime you have any questions about the ADA, you can contact me. I can get you in touch with Ken. Okay? And anytime you have a question, we'll get you the answer, and there will never, ever be a charge. And we'll get you the right answer. So if you have any questions, make sure that you use us. But let's get back to this for a minute. Okay. But you never have to go door through door. The issue here is that you still haven't resolved this situation. Okay? Because you have a driver, Joe, who refused to provide the service, and that was correct. You do not go door through door. Okay? But Joe passed along the information that according to the passenger, another driver, Betty, has provided door through door service. So now what are you going to do about that situation? So here's the question. Hint, choose the best response, not just your first inclination. So let's look at this. Call in Betty and discipline her for not following the agency rules as far as door through door service. Ignore it because it's hearsay and you're really not sure of the facts. Or talk to all drivers and dispatchers about the reasonable modification requirements under ADA, including door to door or door through door. So C is the right answer, right? Because you really don't know, and there's no point in calling Betty in and calling her on the carpet and saying, did you do this? What you really want to do is make sure everyone is really educated on what the policy is. Okay. Just very quickly, do you know why you don't ever want to do door through door? It's a lot of liability. Okay? Let me give you a scenario, and this is a true scenario. It did not happen at my agency, but it did happen at an agency of a friend of mine. They had a driver, Bob. I always use Bob. But they had a driver, Bob, who was a really great guy. And this lady asked if he would please, he brought her groceries to the door and set them by the door. And she said, Bob, could you please put them on my table? It's right inside the door. And Bob could see her kitchen table. I mean, it was 2 steps inside the door. And all he had to do is take those packages and lay them on her table. That's all she wanted. And he realized she'd have to make a couple of trips to be able to do that, and it was hard for her to bend down, and he thought, I'm a good guy, right? All I'm going to do is take 2 steps inside and put those on her kitchen table. So Bob did that. Later in the day, this lady's daughter came home, and she noticed her mom wasn't wearing her wedding ring. And she said, Mom, where's your wedding ring? And the lady had a little bit of dementia. And she said, I don't know, probably over by the sink. I probably took it off when I was doing my dishes. So the daughter looked over by the sink, no wedding ring. Daughter happened to be an attorney. Okay? So she said, Mom, where else could it be? And she said, I don't know. And so the daughter looked everywhere for that wedding ring. And so she looked, and she looked, and she tried to find it. And the daughter said, well, maybe it's on the kitchen table. I have a little dish, and I sometimes put it there. And I'll be with you 1 second. And the daughter said, no, it's not on the kitchen table either. But she noticed there is still a sack of groceries on the kitchen table. And she said, Mom, did you go to the grocery store today? And she said, yeah. And she said, well, was anyone here? How'd you get your groceries in? And she said, well, Bob brought them in for me. He is such a nice guy. He carried my groceries in for me. So Bob was in the kitchen? Yeah. Now, did Bob take her ring? No. Can Bob prove he didn't take her ring? No. We don't do door-through-door service. You had a question. Yep. You do. And now here's the issue. If you're talking about a mobile person, okay, and there are ways to assist them better, okay, but if they're a person in a wheelchair, okay, you aren't going to be able to get that wheelchair up and down multiple sets of steps. And so then you have to make arrangements, and you are not expected to get that wheelchair up multiple sets of steps. Okay, so that would be separate. And you had a question?
We have that same problem in rural areas. I mean, some places, like you live 500 feet off the road, you can't get the bus in there. So.
Right, okay, and so there are times, and then that's the undue burden part of this, where you aren't able to actually provide the service because you either can't get the bus in where it needs to go, and you can prove that, or you can't turn the bus around once you get into that particular area. There are reasons why you don't have to provide that service, but that's the undue burden part of this, okay? And there's a whole class just on, reasonable modification. There's a million different things that you can be asked to do, some of which you have to do, and some of which you do not have to do. And that's important to learn. Ann?
Yeah. What about when the driver gets to a medical office building? They take the wheelchair passenger to the door.
Right.
They always struggle with this because the person still has to get like to the second floor and through another door.
Okay, and you only have to bring them to that first door. And I know that the drivers...
I can't believe I left him there.
Exactly. The drivers, that is the worst situation. And I don't want to get us off track, so I will answer this question, but we're not going to go into a whole bunch of reasonable modification. But the question was, what happens if you get to a medical facility, okay, and you go under the canopy and there's the set of doors that open, but this person needs to get to the second floor where her appointment is, and she's in a wheelchair, and she can't wheel herself to get herself there. Okay, well, then what does the driver do? Okay, but the driver is not expected to take her all the way to that second floor. Once she's through that set of doors, it becomes the medical facility's issue. And technically, the medical facility is under the ADA as well. They have a responsibility, whether they do it or not, to be able to get her there. Now, sometimes what we did is we worked with the medical facility and said, you know what, when we get her there, she just has to sit until someone comes. You all know she has an appointment there. Is there a way for us to let you know once she gets there so someone will come and get her? So that we tried to work with them on those things. But it doesn't work for the driver to leave their bus with passengers on it to take that person all the way up to the second floor. And so your responsibility stops with getting her through that door. And those are the kinds of things that we cover in the class too, because there's a million different scenarios like that. Okay. The key to all of this is having your drivers and dispatchers and really all your staff, if possible, trained to proficiency on the ADA rules, including reasonable modification, so that they know how to go about making those decisions. You can't tell them every decision they're going to possibly have to make, but you can give them enough guidelines that they can start to see a pattern. Oh, I see how this is going to work. Okay, here. And then whenever possible that they can get a hold of a supervisor, but you might be here and not be able to be in touch. So they have to be able to make those decisions. But when everyone is well trained, they're a lot more confident in the decisions that they're going to make. So here are your resources, and these are things that will be really helpful to you if you want to learn more about these things. This is a great website. You know, FTA does some things really well and it does some things not quite as well, but this is one of the things FTA got right. And this is a great website where it talks about reasonable modification requests, and it gives you lots of samples of questions that they have gotten. Do I have to do this? Okay, yes. Do I have to do this? No. So this is really a good one. It's http://www.fta.dot.gov/civil rights/12325.html. Okay, and this PowerPoint is going to be on the website, so you'll be able to get these. There's another organization called DREDF. Okay, and DREDF stands for Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. It's funded by both FTA and the US DOT, and they are really an advocacy group that teaches you all kinds of things that you need to know, and they talk about all kinds of things that have come up under ADA and determinations that have been made. So again, it gives you situations that have come up and said, this is what you have to do about it, and it's a great guide. The reason I give you these is not only to educate you, but these would make great scenarios for you to use to train drivers. And you only have to do one or two, and then do another one or two later. You know, you can just keep educating them as you go along. And their website is http://DREDF, DREDF.org/transportation. But it's really a great website. Okay, I work for Easterseals, so of course we think we have good resources for you, and we're at http://www.projectaction.com. And I also work with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. It's a federal technical assistance center that's funded by FTA, and we have lots of resources, and they're all of these resources are free. And you can find us at www.nadtc.org. So all kinds of resources for you there. And I know we're going to try to move this along. So if you want, I'm here for the rest of the day. If you have any questions, come find me and I'll be glad to answer them for you. I'm not going to also go around and make you answer this, but the one thing I would like you to think about, at the end of every presentation, I try to say, what's one thing you learned today that you can take home with you and actually implement or do? So right now I would like all of you to just stop and think for a minute, and if you have the ability to write it down and think, this is one thing I'm going to do differently when I leave here today, or I commit to doing when I get home as a result of this. I'm going to review my policies and procedures, or I'm going to look at our rider's guide, or I'm going to go ride that bus, or I am going to talk to my drivers, or I'm going to look at a vision statement, and you can still making a difference. I don't care, okay? But I'm going to do one thing different when I get home. And I always think if you can take one thing, just one thing back with you that made a difference, okay, then it was worth the time of sitting here. So please think of that, because otherwise, you know what happens? You get home and you get buried in all the stuff that's waiting for you, and it kind of goes by the wayside. So take one moment now to think about what that might be. And then this is my contact information. It's just cwright@easterseals.com. If you ever have an ADA question, please reach out to me. I promise I'll probably give it to Ken because he's just the best. But you'll hear from either Ken or I, and we will make sure absolutely that question gets answered, and there is never, ever a charge. So if you're struggling with something, we'll help you get through it. So thank you. Look at your policies and procedures. Try to be consistent. I know there are difficult decisions, but you are doing, really what I consider God's work out there in terms of working with the most vulnerable people who need you. And every single day, you improve the quality of your life, and they improve the quality of yours. So please, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do every day. And make sure that you pass that on to the people who are out there on the front line too. So thank you.